Thank you very much, Shirati. And I would like to thank Ian for a very dynamic presentation. I am here this afternoon to talk to you about the fundamentals of digital trade. And we all know that's the bread and butter of our economy. So I'm just going to highlight some issues for you to consider as we proceed with the discussion this afternoon. Something that we've all talked about is the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic exposed weaknesses in our economic systems. And it has also allowed us to embrace technology in its full form. It's been driven by exponential growth in new and emerging technologies such as AI, robotics, machine learning, and we've even taken up some of the old, such as blockchain and DLT, cloud computing, and integrated that into our current systems. But the fact of the matter is that within the Commonwealth and the world at large, technology moves more quickly than the law and legal systems within the Commonwealth. And we'll come to that a bit later. But the real risk is that emerging and island economies will be left behind. So post-COVID, we have found that the biggest opportunities are digital. When it comes to what are some of the innovations that has put us forward, that has allowed economies to thrive and survive within the global pandemic, it has been digital transformation initiatives in the government sector, within health, within education, as my colleague Ian has just pointed out to. More so, countries are very much likely, where they may have been hesitant before, to take up digital services and digital transformation. In terms of where I come in and what we look at the Commonwealth connectivity agenda, it is paperless trade. We all know that the basis for our economy, our survival, where we get our money from, is to ensure that the trade systems keep on moving. And this came out as a very important priority within recent times. Paperless trade really refers to the digitalization of our manual-based processes. And this involves not just goods and customs handling, but it involves the SMEs and the persons who put their businesses within the trade hemisphere as a whole. And within a recent report that the Commonwealth Secretariat commissioned, which is the quantitative analysis of the move to paperless trade, we found some very, very interesting and impactful data. Digital trade facilitation across borders could increase trade by approximately 90 billion US. And if we engage in legal reforms that are necessary to support digital trade by the digitization of electronic records, we could unleash as much as $1.1 trillion, bringing the benefits of paperless trade to nearly $1.2 trillion by 2026. Granted, 2026 is right around the corner, and this is no small number. So the impact is definitely real and tangible, and it's something that we all need to take on board when looking at our national strategies. So, as I had mentioned before, there's the impact of trade facilitation, legal reform. But combine this with over $2 trillion in the value of goods that could be enabled, it could create a reduction in the cost of businesses trading across borders of around 75% on average. So what does that mean for all of you within this room? Because I know this is an area of great interest. There's an actual reduction in the potential for compliance fraud, corruption, and human error, as well as the reduction in costs and delays for business. I'm not going to go over my time or digress too much, but we recently had a workshop in Barbados last week on effective frameworks for building the digital economy. And the opening remarks were delivered by the Honorable Attorney General of Barbados. And he said, never lose a good crisis to do the things that you need to do and put things in place. And within the context of the global pandemic, you find that the digitalization of our trade processes is taking advantage of a good crisis to put things in place. And I'm going to go through the steps that are key in moving forward. There's the promotion of access to finance by small businesses that are the small businesses that have really sought to come online, particularly during the pandemic. Enabling businesses to remove bureaucracy. It can accelerate the process of global standardization, which is something that we are very keen on, and creating more inclusive and sustainable recovery. So what are really the building blocks that we need if we're having this conversation about digitalization of trade across the globe? It involves all of you in this room. The first and most critical step that we have encountered is that there's a need to have high-level political support. Top-level endorsement involves putting in place the budgetary allocations to make sure that you can effectively digitize your trade through infrastructure as well as digital skills development. There needs to be a comprehensive policy framework, and we have been working with different countries across the Commonwealth in looking at helping them with their national e-commerce strategies, their development plan, and their national digital economy plans. But this has a trickle-down effect in every single sector that you intend to digitize. There's a legislative framework, which I will come to very shortly. It is necessary also to have in place an effective institutional governance framework. And this involves allowing your systems to be able to speak, to be able to be interoperable, and to allow for data sharing, because it is something that happens across governments, across the globe, data silos. We operate like little digital islands with each of our transformative programs. And of course, something that many of my colleagues will be speaking to, so I will defer to them, reliable and affordable broadband connectivity, which I would say is our baseline foundation. In a recent World Bank report, it was highlighted that just a 10% increase in fixed broadband can have an impact of 1.21% increased GDP within developed countries and 1.38% within developing countries. And that is something that can reap a great financial gain for us in these difficult financial times. So what are the key focuses that we want to look at when we realistically look at how do we put this into place? There needs to be open platforms and interoperability of systems. And I know my colleague touched on it in terms of scalability. We each do projects, but we don't think about how they integrate as a whole, not only now, but down the line in the future, given the fact that technology changes. Even now, in the blink of the eye, current new technology will become superannuated. Document simplification and standardization. And this involves having common standards so that systems, not just within your regions, but globally, can speak. And your digitalization efforts are going to be something that can carry you down the road in the next 5 to 10 years. There needs to be regulatory alignment and interoperability. Notice I'm not saying regulatory harmonization, because that's a very lofty ideal. What we're looking at is alignment and interoperability so that we have at least the ability to work together cooperatively without necessarily having the same exact standards, because we all know how difficult that could be. Cross-border exchange of information. Capacity building is key. You can have the most fancy and dynamic systems that are cutting edge. We all know that you require the human capacity to operate and maintain, and even to build upon the systems that you are implementing. And of course, international cooperation. So in looking at the legal, and I'm going to move very quickly past this, you can see from this map that we're all at different levels of legal development. Some countries have all laws in place, some have none. But how does that work when you attempt to do digital trade or trade data or information? It means that the disparities actually serve as a barrier to trade. And policy change and policy issues do arise. So how do we deal with this? It is looking at, I would humbly stress, looking at alignment of your legislation. And this can be done through adopting common standards, or even looking at using international models such as UNCITRAL Melita when it comes to electronic transferable records. looking at developing regional trade policy frameworks in relation to data authentication and cybersecurity, which our chair has mentioned. I think we've touched on interoperability and to cross-border exchange of information. And I think I can just close by stressing something that we have found to be key and critical within Commonwealth countries. It is important that you invest in your people. I know when we look at digital transformation, we think primarily in terms of technology, but it is people that drive this process. And to close, I would say it is necessary in looking at digitalization and how to accelerate it, that we need to pursue legal reform in a way that allows for international alignment rather than identical systems across the board, because interoperability is key. In looking at digital transformation, it is important to look at it holistically. I know in the government we tend to operate in silos, but in reality it involves working together to ensure that you can combine legal reform with the policies to include digital inclusion, trade facilitation systems such as your single windows and digital IDs, as well as the actual mechanisms to address physical obstacles to trade. Promote sensitization and trust building, because believe it or not, change management and the aversion to new things is something that is real within the government. Work with SMEs, women, and other special groups in order to close that gap or digital divide. And most importantly, which I'm sure my colleagues will address now, facilitate and share best practices in relation to internet and broadband digital infrastructure. So on that note, I'd like to thank you and hand over to you, Chair.